Traoré's heart sank as the evidence piled up. His cousin, his family, was caught meeting with a French diplomat linked to destabilization efforts. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it jeopardized the entire nation. But why? Why would someone so close trade trust for greed? The shocking confrontation is only the beginning of this political thriller that will leave you questioning every bond of loyalty. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. What happens when the person you've trusted your whole life suddenly seems like a stranger? For Ibrahim Traoré, it was a question that didn't come with warning signs, at least not at first. His cousin Karim wasn't just family, he was someone Traoré had relied on through years of political struggles. They shared childhood memories, laughed at the same old stories, and respected the bond of family that had always felt unbreakable. Karim had been by Traoré's side during moments of doubt and had celebrated triumphs with him when no one else could. There was no one Traoré trusted more. But trust, as he would soon learn, can erode in silence before it truly shatters. It started small. At first, Traoré didn't pay much attention to the late-night phone calls or the way Karim had started excusing himself from important discussions. Everyone gets busy, he thought. Besides, Karim had been loyal for so long. His actions never raised suspicion before, so why should they now? But the signs kept piling up. There was the unexpected secrecy. Conversations cut off the moment Traoré entered the room, documents left unsigned without explanation, and a growing uneasiness in Karim's demeanor. He was still present, still smiling, but there was a distance now, like he wasn't fully there anymore. The moment that truly unsettled Traoré came on an otherwise quiet evening. As they were discussing plans for an upcoming event, Traoré asked Karim about a meeting he'd supposedly attended earlier that week. Without missing a beat, Karim described the meeting in detail. Who was there, what had been discussed, and the outcomes they'd reached. But later, during a routine briefing with his advisors, Traoré discovered that the meeting had been canceled at the last minute. Karim hadn't just stretched the truth, he had fabricated it entirely. That wasn't like him. Karim had always been precise, reliable, the one person who never needed to be second-guessed. What was going on? Traoré stayed quiet for days, watching and waiting. Every small change in Karim's behavior began to feel magnified. Did he seem quieter than usual? Why did he avoid certain topics in conversation? In high-stakes politics, even the smallest inconsistencies signal larger cracks below the surface. Traoré knew this better than anyone. Still, his mind wrestled with the possibility that his cousin might betray him. It was family, after all, and family is supposed to stand by you, no matter how high the pressure climbs. But the more he thought about it, the more those little changes in Karim's behavior added up to one unsettling truth. Something wasn't right. The tipping point came on an ordinary morning when an anonymous tip landed on Traoré's desk. Carefully worded, the message warned of clandestine meetings between Karim and foreign agents working against the interests of Burkina Faso. The names referenced within the note weren't unfamiliar. They had long been suspected of trying to destabilize the region. The calmness Traoré had tried to maintain shattered. Before, the question had only been, could I be mistaken? Now it had spiraled into, how much is already lost? He ran through every scenario in his mind. Could it be disinformation meant to sow chaos within his circle? Or worse, was this the missing piece that tied all of Karim's growing distance together? Traoré didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was clear. Karim wasn't who he once thought he was. Outwardly, Traoré remained composed, concealing the storm brewing inside him. He couldn't act impulsively, not without knowing the truth. And so an investigation began. For Traoré, the personal heartbreak of suspecting his cousin was secondary to the enormous stakes at hand. If the tip was true, this wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of the entire nation. But how deep did this go? How far had Karim ventured into the shadows? And was it already too late to save the bond they once shared? What would you do if your worst fears stopped being whispers in the back of your mind and became undeniable proof staring you in the face? For Traoré, The moment of truth began with a quiet plan. After receiving the anonymous tip, he worked methodically, instructing a small group of his most loyal officers to observe Karim's movements. These men weren't just trustworthy, they were well-versed in handling situations where secrecy was paramount. Their mission was clear: track Karim, monitor his interactions, and report back anything unusual. No noise, no mistakes. This had to be handled delicately. At first, the details they brought back were subtle. Karim was leaving his residence later than usual, frequenting upscale parts of the city on his own, and regularly visiting a particular high-end hotel known for hosting foreign dignitaries. But one name quickly stood out. Jean-Marc Drain, a French diplomat with a long-standing reputation for meddling in regional politics, had been seen entering the same hotel at almost the exact times Karim was there. That connection sparked all kinds of red flags. Drain wasn't just a figure of idle curiosity. His name was already tied to numerous efforts to destabilize governments across the region. His involvement turned the vague concerns around Karim into something far more alarming. The reports from the surveillance team grew more precise. Over the course of a week, they documented Karim arriving at the hotel under the cover of supposed errands. What stood out, though, was how careful he became. He wasn't traveling with any of his usual staff or bodyguards. He even avoided entering through the main lobby, opting instead for a private side entrance reserved for VIPs. This wasn't casual. It was planned, calculated. The team's suspicions deepened when Drain was seen leaving the hotel shortly after Karim on 3 separate occasions. But the true confirmation came during a late-night stakeout. That evening, one of Traoré's officers managed to capture a clear photo of Karim sitting across a table from Drain, exchanging documents. That image changed everything. For Traoré, this was the moment that erased all doubt. The scene spoke volumes. Karim looking over his shoulder every few minutes, Drain leaning in like they were sharing something no one else could hear. The file Karim handed over might as well have been a nail sealing the coffin. This wasn't an innocent meeting or a coincidence. It was what Traoré had feared most, a betrayal playing out in real time. And yet, as much as the discovery confirmed suspicions, it also unearthed an even heavier reality. Karim wasn't just betraying him, he was complicit in something that could harm the stability of the country itself. Foreign interference has always been a shadow looming over African nations, and Burkina Faso is no different. In a world where external forces often seek to manipulate internal politics for their own gain, alliances like the one Karim seemed to be forming with people like Drain carried a dangerous weight. It wasn't just about power struggles within family dynamics anymore. This went beyond bloodlines. Traoré wasn't just fighting a personal battle. He was staring at the potential unraveling of his government, a cascade that could ripple across the region. But while the evidence demanded action, the decision of how to respond wasn't simple. Confronting Karim publicly risked exposing how deeply this betrayal had already festered. At the same time, delaying might give him more time to do irreparable damage. Traoré wrestled with the dilemma. He could feel the weight of every option pulling on him, layering emotion onto cold strategy. Eventually, he chose his course. He would meet Karim privately to question him directly. There needed to be no room for misinterpretation, no second-guessing. What was left of their bond demanded as much. And so, Traoré prepared for the confrontation, knowing it wouldn't just test his leadership, but his capacity to face his cousin as both a head of state and a man betrayed. How do you handle sitting across from someone who once felt like an extension of yourself, knowing they have already turned against you? That was the question Traoré carried as he planned his next move, a question with no easy answer. How do you confront betrayal when it comes from someone you love? For Traoré, it began with a single phone call. He asked Karim to meet him in private, his voice steady but devoid of its usual warmth. The meeting was set for the late evening in Traoré's private office, a room that had seen moments of victory, loss, and now, the most difficult test of his career and family. The atmosphere in the office felt heavier than usual. The windows were closed, shutting out the noise of the city, while only the low hum of the desk lamp filled the stillness. Traoré sat behind a large wooden desk, its surface cleared of all but a single folder, the one that contained the evidence he wished he didn't have. He heard Karim's hesitant knock before the door creaked open. The man who walked in wasn't quite the same as the cousin Traoré had once confided in. There was no easy smile, no familiarity in his expression. Instead, Karim hesitated, his stance unsure as he closed the door behind him. Traoré's eyes remained on his cousin, silently searching for a trace of remorse, a sign that what he felt in his heart might not be true. But there was nothing, only a quiet tension that grew heavier as seconds passed. "Sit down," Traoré said softly, motioning to the chair across from him. Karim complied, eyes briefly flicking to the folder on the desk before he returned his gaze to Traoré. It wasn't an interrogation room, but the dynamic was undeniable. "I know everything," came Traoré's measured words. His voice didn't rise, but the impact silenced the room entirely. Karim froze, his mouth parting slowly, as if struggling to find an immediate response. Traoré didn't give him time to speak. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on Karim's, and continued. "The late-night meetings, the diplomat, what you've been handing over, it's all here." He tapped the folder, the sound echoing like a gavel in the quiet room. "I trusted you. You were family. How could you do this?" Karim shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the arms of the chair tightly. I didn't want to do it," he began, his voice shaky, but his explanation came too late. Traoré opened the folder, slowly pulling out the photograph that showed Karim sitting across from Jean-Marc Drain, the document exchange unmistakable. He laid it flat on the desk, sliding it toward Karim. His cousin's face drained of color. "Tell me the truth," Traoré pressed, his tone even as frustration and disappointment swirled beneath the surface. Karim hesitated before finally lowering his head. "They promised me power," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "Money. Influence. They said it was just small things. Nothing that would threaten you." His words trailed off, but they were enough. Traoré's chest tightened. The confirmation wasn't soothing. It felt like a cut that wouldn't stop bleeding. Even as Karim spilled the details, a web of influence, promises of rewards and justifications that rang hollow, Traoré barely heard him. His mind was racing with the consequences. This wasn't just a betrayal of him as a relative, but one that jeopardized the stability of Burkina Faso itself. Had Karim even considered what his actions would cost the country, or had private ambition blinded him completely? A heavy silence followed as Karim finished. For a moment, neither man spoke. Traoré stared down at the desk, his hands gripping its edges. The room seemed too small to hold the weight of what had just been said. He wanted to scream. He wanted to walk out. Most of all, he wanted the simple relationship they'd shared in the past, a time when this kind of betrayal would have been unthinkable. But he couldn't dwell on what was lost. He had a responsibility far bigger than himself. "Do you understand what you've done? Not just to me, but to this country?" Traoré asked, his voice low but fierce. Karim didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than anything else could. Traoré sat back, forcing himself to breathe deeply as the decision formed in his mind. It was painful, but it was necessary. There was no time to hesitate. Karim's actions had left him no other choice. That night, Traoré made the decision to expose Karim publicly. The fallout wasn't just personal. It would bring scrutiny to his leadership, divide loyalties, and potentially weaken the government's image. Yet the truth was too great to hide, and protecting the future of Burkina Faso demanded sacrifice. Family ties were important, yes, but not at the cost of the nation. It was clear now. Traoré had to choose the country over blood, no matter the cost. Betrayal, especially from within, cuts deeper than any external threat. It isn't just about one act. It seeds doubt that can unravel even the strongest foundations. For Traoré, the betrayal by his cousin wasn't just personal. It was a crack in the trust holding his nation together. Leaders often assume loyalty is absolute, but as this story reminds us, even the closest bonds can be conditional. So how do we protect what matters most when danger hides in familiar faces? For Burkina Faso, this test of resilience could define its future. The question now is, will it emerge stronger or divided?